I suppose the thing I would like readers of the Sahara to take away most is the sheer variety of stories that have taken place in this amazing desert. What I want to do is break away from the cliche of the desert as an empty place. There are parts of the desert for sure where nobody can live, but it's not about the wasteland, it's about the human land. It's about the stories that go back over thousands of years from the time when the desert was wet. I mean, there are rock paintings there of elephants in the desert. There are crocodiles on rock art in the desert. Basically anything that impacts on Western and, for that matter, Middle Eastern history, it's taken place in this great desert at one time or another. I suppose that Sahara has really been part of my emotional, imaginative makeup since I was a very small boy. I mean, I grew up sitting on my father's knee listening to his stories about Egypt and the desert from when he was there in the 1950s with the British Army. Yes, certainly there's something very mystical. It wasn't until after my father died that I made my first journey to Egypt, and perhaps that was tied up with his passing, that it was the year after his death I first set foot in the Sahara for myself. And that's close to 2 decades ago now, and the love affair just grows every year. I suppose, in a sense, he was the inspiration for me writing this book. I was very excited to get the commission for this book, The Sahara, A Cultural History, but it did take me a long time to work out what exactly I was going to do with my material. I mean, I've been reading about the Sahara for years at that stage and traveling extensively in north and south, east and west. But there is so much material to cover that it took me a long time to work out an organizational structure for the book. And I'm happy that we've got it right now. I think readers might be surprised to learn how many world first events took place in the Sahara and those lands touching on the Sahara. For instance, the first US action overseas, the first military action overseas took place in Libya. It was the Battle of Derna in 1805. That's 206 years ago from the time of this recording. And 206 years later, Libya is still front and center of newspaper headlines today. Looking at the variety of characters in the book, it would help if I just turned to the letter S here in the index. I mean, just a random selection of the S-named characters or individuals in the book. We have Saint-Exupéry, the author of The Little Prince, and his plane crash in the Libyan desert, which is a tremendous story which we cover here. We have Carlos Santana, we have Satan, we have Telly Savalas. We have Charles Schulz and Snoopy. What's his relevance to the Sahara? Well, they're all in here. William Shakespeare, the poet Shelley, Luke Skywalker. There's a link to the film Star Wars in the Sahara that I think any film buff already knows, but those who perhaps don't should read about it in here. I suppose my first attempt to go off to explore was at the age of 5 when I told my mother one day that I was going off to explore. And I think she was rather distracted and busy cooking tea. And she said, "Oh, well, off you go then, dear." And I did. I left the house carrying a very small childish suitcase in which I'd packed my teddy bear and a pair of pajamas. And I got to the end of the street when a kindly man who ran the local delicatessen asked me where was I going. And I told him in my 5-year-old voice that I was off to Africa to explore. And he said, "Shouldn't you go home and have your tea first?" Which I did. So it was 20 years before I eventually got over to African shores. But since then, it's been an ongoing love affair. Yeah, the time that I spent walking in the desert with camels certainly had a major impact on my life. I don't suppose I've ever done anything before or since that had such a profound, almost mystical impact on my person. This book isn't the story of those explorations of mine in the desert, although those explorations obviously inform my love of the Sahara, and that, I hope, comes across on every page of the book. I suppose one of the most famous names, legendary I suppose is a better choice, is the city of Timbuktu in modern Mali. I mean, Timbuktu is a place that when I was growing up, and I suppose still today, means the other side of the world. It was like the dark side of the moon. And it featured so heavily in the 17th, 18th and 19th century history of African exploration. I mean, all of these people that were sent out from London by the African Association, which later became the Royal Geographical Society, to go off and find Timbuktu, which was a legendary city of gold. Of course, by the time they got there, most of the gold had gone, and what they found instead was a very poor, dull, uninteresting to the explorers in many ways city. Another very important point about the book is that although it's called A Cultural History, it isn't just things of the past. I mean, I understand that history means that of the past, investigations of things that have come before. But without an understanding of history, we don't have any grip on what's going on today. And the whole of this book really informs what's happening in the world of the Middle East today, or at least in North Africa. Those revolutions which have taken place in Egypt and Tunisia and Libya, the troubles which are underreported in Algeria and Morocco, and in the countries of the southern part of the Sahara. We mustn't forget them. I mean, this book goes up to and includes the referendum in Sudan. So things that are taking place in North Africa today are very much informed by the pages of this book. I suppose I'd like readers of the Sahara to take away the sheer variety of landscapes of the desert. It's not just unending sand dunes. It's not wholly devoid of people by any means. The population of the Sahara might be just 3 million people. And I should point out that the desert itself, the Sahara, covers an area that's roughly the same size as the United States of America, including Alaska. It's vast, and yet only 3 million people live there. In spite of that, I suppose what I would like readers of the Sahara to take away are the very many landscapes that are there, both geographical, physical landscapes, and, as the series title suggests, those landscapes of the imagination. The desert has inspired some of our greatest thinkers, philosophers, poets, novelists, and filmmakers for centuries. And they're more or less all in here, apart from those, of course, that had to be edited for reasons of space.